we can offer them a solution whereby we'll do all their utilities on site, so the electric, the water, and the heat solution. Our solution is ambient networks. We can also do a heat network, but based off boreholes. And to facilitate that, we formed a joint venture with an organisation called ESCo, who are experts in the design and construction of these networks. And they perform all those works for us alongside our own teams doing the electric and water installations on our sites. On the asset management side of the business, we obviously leveraged the existing expertise within our business, so as we can manage these heat network assets using our existing staff alongside our other assets. So far, the heat side of our business has been a success. There's appetite in the market with developers for a heat solution, certainly in Scotland, with the move away from gas and imminent regulation, which we certainly see as a good thing. It brings confidence to developers, confidence to potential customers, and confidence to us as a business and our investors that we can contract and generate a return. Is that enough?
Thank you. I think most of you in here know me. I'm Mark Potter. I'm with Kensa, and yeah, what he said. We design, manufacture, and install ground source heat pumps, shared ground loops, shared ground arrays, shared heat collectors. Thank you. That was very generically put. There's a £20 note on its way here. So yeah, Kensa got multiple projects across UK at the moment. We have a new build private developer, Abrham, now, which would be similar to what Robin's doing, but my particular role is within the social housing sector and retrofit. And we've got a few projects currently at the moment across the UK, retrofitting ground sourcing to both gas, and also degassing tower blocks, and we're also replacing direct electric storage here. So we've got quite a lot on, and obviously the small scale heat networks that Paul spoke about earlier within the rural areas, clearly a nice market for us to speak to. I think something that you might have mentioned earlier, Sheelagh, was we have to sell heat networks. And if you notice on my job title, it used to be regional sales manager, and I took the sales bit out because you can't speak to anybody in a local authority if you've got sales in your job title. But the fact remains that every single person in this room is a salesman or a salesperson. We've got to try and sell what we're doing to the wider public. So yeah, I think we've got a big job on our hands, but if everybody here's going for it, then we've got a chance. Just one other sort of final thing, something that Andrew mentioned, which we've said before as well. The public purse will not fund net zero. It just won't. So investment funding through grants and through private equity or through private funding needs to be less scary. We need to make it easier. We need to make it as cheap as we possibly can. Things like the National Wealth Fund, they have a very high ceiling, so suits the big district heat network providers. It's 25 million or something you have to borrow. Right? We do small scale projects, like as Paul mentioned, you can have a village of 140 properties. You can have another village 20 miles up the road or 10 miles up the road with 400. We couldn't get none of them could get any funding through the National Wealth Fund individually. None of them. But they're just as desperate for the fund at a low rate as anywhere else. So consolidating that, we've spoken with James Hempel with the Scottish Government about consolidating these funding applications for the smaller projects. So there is a role for that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny Cowe, I'm a Business Development Manager with Scottish Water Horizons. I work in the Heat from Wastewater team. For those that aren't aware, Scottish Water Horizons is our wholly owned subsidiary of Scottish Water. We have a large amount of wastewater across Scotland. Our network's 34,000 miles of sewer, 1,800 treatment works, and over 1 billion litres of wastewater a day. It's a good source of low temperature, low carbon heat. Typically, even in the middle of winter, be say 8-10 degrees, maybe more, 12 in the sewer. We have been involved with or developed 5 heat networks on our network over the years. The first one was in Shielagh, which is a shout out to Stuart at Research over there, which is, I'll let him do any detailed questions on that one. So that was the first in the UK that takes heat from the sewer, does Borders College and Heriot Walk campus down there. Also got a small one in Campbelltown, doing a leisure centre, Stirling, Dalmarnock, and the Paisley Way Park using the Amos facility. Effectively, we're a heat wholesaler, and we can get involved in a variety of different ways in public-private partnerships to develop that. Over the years, we've worked with a number of partners. See Ross from Stirling Council's in here, worked with them on developing that network. That's owned by the Venta now, Charlie's in here now. So we're very flexible in terms of how we work and where we work on our assets. And we'll do that on a project-by-project basis. So we are not funded by your council tax, so we do need to wash our face financially, but we're also owned by the Scottish Government, they're our shareholder. So we do have a remit from them to use our asset to decarbonise the nation's estate effectively. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Richardson. I'm a Principal Procurement Specialist within Scotland Excel. I work in the Contract Delivery team under the Construction Commodity category. So Scotland Excel, we are a centre of procurement expertise. We are funded by the 32 local authorities as well as our members. 32 local authorities are members of ours. We have a growing list of associate members, usually charitable bodies, third sector organisations, other public bodies such as Police Scotland, universities and colleges, and NHS, universities and colleges, and I think that's actually. So we've got a range of associate members who we work with collaboratively to develop our frameworks. I'm here today because we have a brand new framework for local heat and energy efficiency strategies, which was again developed collaboratively with the Scottish Government and their local authority members to align with national policy and objectives. It went live in April this year. It runs for 4 years. There are 15 awarded consultants on that, with a mix of large to small to medium enterprises. There's even a micro organisation awarded on it, as well as 2 Scottish organisations. I'm here really to talk about the framework. The benefits of the framework is a mechanism for local authorities to procure LHEs-based consultancy services. The framework's split into 3 lots. The first lot is for updates and reviews of LHEs plans. The second lot is for feasibility studies for heat networks such as district heating. And the third lot is for the technical analysis requirements for local area energy plans. Thank you.
Back to the start. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and I think this is probably one for everyone. I'm sure everyone will follow on this. So we heard from Andrew earlier about how busy the market is in England. There's very large sort of town and city networks are starting their procurement process. And in Scotland, realistically, we're going to have very few opportunities on that scale. And many of our district heating networks are going to be smaller settlements, and as Paul illustrated, some of them are going to be smaller still. And I have confidence, Paul, that shared collect. That's your term will catch on. Shared, no. It will catch on. So it's going to be tough to compete for investment in that market, and when the opportunity is small scale. And Mark, you mentioned the challenge that you're having with funding some of the smaller projects. What good options do the panel see for getting some of these smaller scale networks delivered? can we innovate in this space, maybe through bundling or perhaps using some well-designed frameworks also?
I'll go first. In terms of funding for networks, we would offer an asset value for the long-term adoption ownership of heat networks, whereby often we find with developers that they will get a capital receipt once we pay them that asset value and the network's been built and installed to the standard that we set. Further benefits can be realised when you do a multi-utility installation, whereby one organisation does all the utilities on site. And so rather than just offering asset value against one utility, you're then grouping those together and providing a much more competitive valuation on those assets in the ground. And you can model that over a longer period because there's certainty when you bundle it all together with all the utilities. So as a delivery model, it works. We're doing it now. The challenges are though in ensuring that there's sufficient return, that we can get over our own internal investment hurdles and invest in that network and provide the valuation that a developer wants, thinks, or hopes for. Anyone else?
Yeah, what he said. Right, you wish you'd sat there now. Yeah, I completely agree. The model that Robin's describing there is pretty well proven now. The market's definitely growing. We're seeing it, you're seeing it. So, and it's great for new build. There are different funding mechanisms required for social housing and for local authorities. They don't like borrowing money. They've been told for 40 years they don't borrow money, and now they're being told, well, you can't do anything unless you borrow money. So there's a little bit of a culture shift. Kensa are owned by Octopus and Legal in general. They have funding. They will offer that funding to local authorities to pay the funding gap. But again, they're looking for a return. And that return is consistent with market returns we see elsewhere. It's just convincing people that if they want to do something, they're going to need to borrow some of that CapEx to make it achievable. And then how they fund that CapEx over the lifetime of the materials that are going in of the supply. It's not a 4-year return. It's going to take, it's a mortgage. It's 20-25 years. And I think somebody was Andrew, did you put up numbers there for lifetime costs between 15 and 25 or 35 years for return? So yeah, that's consistent, but again, it requires that first step to take fund.
I'll kind of answer the question, but change it to maybe the economics of it and how you make it more financeable. Again, Mark touched on this earlier, and I've seen other presentations he's done. There's an awful lot of smaller places and rural places that aren't on the gas grid. So their status quo of oil or LPG or whatnot is expensive, and it's probably only going to go up. So again, the Campbelltown one that we did is a small one in a pump station that does a leisure centre. That's on a gas island. And then the other one, I know there's plenty of other people will say this at a big scale and a small scale, is especially rural, if there's a chance for a private wire and even offset solar or whatnot. But again, these are all things that just make it a bit more financeable and maybe can help with the funding.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we heard earlier about the market's frustrations about so many unique tendering exercises going on at the one time. I guess I'm here to promote the benefits of national framework agreements. The fact that instead of 32 local authorities each putting out their own tender, we capture that in the national framework. Standardisation across the board as well, so you have standard terms and conditions that are being called off on a regular basis by the market, and things like transparency in pricing. Talking about the LE's framework, people rates and percentages are fixed for the 4 years, so you can see those upfront costs already. And it's also one of the main things for members, it's a compliant route to market. There's also flexibility in our framework agreements. All the awarded consultants have been through the qualification stage, they've all been vetted, so to speak. And there's flexibility in terms of call-off as well. We don't do rank frameworks at Scotland Excel. Our members have options for either direct award by approaching the consultant directly in terms of a project, or they can run further many competitions as well. We also encourage quite a lot of the use of capability and capacity inquiries. So if you know the project you're going out with and you know the deadlines, you can pre-engage with the market to see right up front if they are capable to carry out those services before you then enter into a procurement exercise.
Just a couple of thoughts following on from the session we heard earlier, which I think Ocean and Paul really gave us some of the challenges and some of the solutions, I think, to this. So firstly, for smaller schemes, because I think, Robin, you've got a solution for the new builds, but a lot of these are going to be retrofit in these small communities. Firstly, making sure it's the right solution, so proper feasibility to make sure it's the right solution for those particular projects. And then secondly, scale. So I think bundling, the South of Scotland prospectus looks to me like the right idea. If you can bundle them all up at scale, then it becomes a more interesting opportunity for an investor. But I think the third thing, and this is I think the real challenge, it's the bit Ocean talked about earlier with how do you get all of these individual private owner occupiers to want to commit at the same time in order to build the revenue confidence that's going to be needed. Now maybe over scale, you can say, well, that's going to come on over time, but that's still a really hard case to make. And I think we need to think maybe around policy or support in order to enable that transition.
Thank you. Just following on from that, Sarah, obviously you talked about a big part of developing successful models about allocating the right risks in the right places. Do you think there are some risks like that in the Scottish market that are just not sitting in the right place? And does the public sector and government need to do more to kind of mitigate those risks? Thank you.
I think actually part of the problem is I'm not really sure where it's sitting just now. It's identified, but I don't think it's allocated really to anyone. It's one of the reasons why I'm usually keen to advocate for private sector involvement in projects, because they have a sales team. Fundamentally you have to go out and sell to people and persuade them that they want to connect. But I do still think there's, even with the best firm in the world, that's not going to convince everyone. So there may need to be some policy support, a bit of a carrot and stick, so maybe some funding to help people make the switch, and perhaps some sticks around what might happen if they don't. And that could come through EPCs, for example, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the right policy lever. But I think there's going to have to be something, because I don't think persuasion is going to work to achieve the scale that would be needed to support the investment case.
I think as well, the technology works, and there's no reason why it can't be applied as a retrofit solution to properties. But when you're dealing with a private enterprise, why would we go and start herding kittens? 100 homes that may or may not know what heat network is all about. If it's something new, they're probably not going to be interested in it. When you can speak to one developer and contract directly, guaranteeing your investment and the return of that investment over 500 homes, and then leave that the understanding and selling of that technology to a sales team that the developer will be employing anyway, and they'll be dealing directly with those potential customers and homeowners. It's then up to us as a heat networks business to give the understanding to the developers and their own sales team so that they can sell those benefits to the potential home buyers and customers. And that's the difficult part when you're trying to do retrofit across a disparate number of properties, and homeowners, you don't know where they are.
I've got one more question from you just now, and then we'll really open up to the floor. But following on from that, I think we talked about the risk profile of heat networks, and Sarah explained that there's not a huge amount of debt finance available really because of risk profile. And this can make a lot of models that don't have access to funding quite challenging, including community-owned or led models. So she explained that they'd identified this challenge in Thurso and the lack of options available there. How can we ensure that community objectives are still met, and customer voices are still represented in kind of privately led or structures with less community control? And do we have any solutions for this?
I'm going to give a plug to this man sitting here, and David from Chef in Edinburgh. So I know he's worked with an awful lot of other projects there, and I think groups like Chef, can help across there. That's obviously, other one there. I've been to a few events and meetings and work there. Again, if we could replicate that across the country, that would help. So I know that's definitely, one option there. And I know we've worked with Reheat in the past in terms of how they engage communities. But yeah. Anyway.
I think Danny's kind of answered my point, so I think it's fine. Sounds okay.
Okay, do we have any questions from? Oh, yes, pass it mic actually. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya, and this question is on behalf of myself, but to the entire panel. In terms of the delivery models that have been discussed, there's a distinction, I think, between the development and construction risk elements and then the operational risk elements in terms of how that attracts different investors with different risk profiles. So my question to the panel is, in terms of the delivery models you'll work with and have experience with, which ones do you think have the greatest potential to lock out potential third-party finance coming in at the operational stage, and which ones are more incentivized to bring in third-party finance at the operational stage?
So what are the risks on blocking out?
I'll start on the construction side. When you're contracting with a developer, they own the site. They've often done ground surveys, so the risk is minimal. There's also there's a huge program integration risk there for heat networks relative to the other utilities that developers are putting into the ground. They're very conversant in the traditional utilities. They're not so with heat networks, and they're so thereby having trenches open for utilities for a longer period of time. The depths of those trenches, the width of them, how it sits relative to the water network is a continual hot potato. And construction risks are massive. And retrofit is even bigger because you don't know what's going in the ground, what was there before, what are the ground conditions. And that's just in the ground before you even get to the fabric of the building that you're retrofitting to. Is the building suitable for a low temperature heat network? More often than not, it won't be. And you're then into a separate conversation about fabric upgrades. So from a construction point of view, the risks are massive.
Yeah, what he said.
Talk about operations.
Yeah, there's clearly a CapEx, OpEx issue. One of the things that we haven't, I think, Emma spoke about right at the start, we've not mentioned since, is just transition. And we could put in as much fancy stuff as we like, and we do have a tendency to be very technical and very clever, and there are lots of clever people kicking about. But ultimately, what we've got to make sure is that we're not doing something to someone which is detrimental to them economically or emotionally. And so by, with these big CapEx projects, we need to make sure that we're not pushing some of that onto the OpEx side. So from our perspective, what we do is we don't sell heat. We provide the infrastructure, and because there's an individual heat pump in the property, they buy their electricity from whichever electricity provider they wish to. And there's a lot of electricity providers that do very good tariffs. So our upfront risk is the CapEx, the cost to install something. You could go and stick direct electric storage shares in if you want. That decarbonises property. But what's the likely outcome within the just transition? put a break through poverty with the current price of electricity. And it's all been well said, yeah, we might change the price of electricity. We might not. And if we don't, all the time that takes to come down, you've got people in food poverty. So, from our perspective, anybody, when we offer investment to help support the construction and the delivery of the project, we have the payback is the standing charge, which is offset against the cost savings. So, for example, you have a standing charge for your gas right now. So the funding that we offer is repaid by a standing charge. But you still have the option to buy your tariff, your whatever you like. So it's a slightly different model. And the model that with the new bills is absolutely bang on. You pay a fee for all of the services that are going in, which makes absolute sense. There's one hole being dug, there's one set of pipes, there's one construction phase. But exactly right, retrofit's not quite as straightforward. So I'm not quite sure how you unlock that.
In terms of the variety of projects with public-private partners, on the capital side, it's try to de-risk it as much as possible with not much investigation up front as we can. It depends on the model, how it's financed. Someone, I can't remember who it was, it's been discussed earlier, was looking at full life cycle costs. People understand the gas boiler or a CHP or whatnot, they know when to replace it. You've got someone inside that can deal with it. And I think it's a bit like, you speak to people of a certain generation and they'll only ever own a car, they won't lease it. And they don't understand it, especially if they're buying heat as a service. So it's communicating that and helping them go to their finance director if they're not privy to, and showing them the costs and getting them to understand that. OPEX, it's, especially in the public sector, you can't decarbonise at any cost. You can't quadruple state bodies, especially private offices as well. Energy bills, and there has to be pragmatic approaches. They might have installed a gas boiler CHP 5 years ago, it's got a lot more time left, maybe you face the electrification and let them use that for peaking, etc. So there's no hard and fast rule from what I've seen.
Yeah, I guess in terms of procurement, our role is to allow the flexibility in the terms and conditions for our members when they are calling off, because at the end of the day, call-offs under our framework agreements, the client is the local authority and our members, so we have to ensure that our terms are flexible enough to allow them to enter into any kind of individual partnerships like that and to not be a blocker, I guess.
So I'm assuming, Tanya, where you were going with the question was looking at what happens in the power sector, where you quite often have either power companies themselves or even debt providers funding construction phase, and then once you get into operations, that flips into, for example, pension fund money, long-term infrastructure investors. And I was kind of mulling over the question. I don't think that there's a particular delivery model blocker to that happening. One of the challenges, I think, is because of how heat networks work as a business rather than an infrastructure project. So, for example, if you build a wind farm, you build the wind farm, you've done the construction phase is now finished. You go into operations phase and you can refinance it because you know what that looks like for the next 30 years. But heat networks aren't intended to be static like that. They'll just keep expanding. So you're always going to need some level of construction finance. So I think you could structure something in to allow for that, but it probably needs to reach a scale of operational maturity in order to get the infra investors or the sort of more standard infrastructure investors in. I don't think there's any particular model really that locks it out, because if it's coming in as debt, it would always be able to come in as debt at some point, provided you get that level of maturity and maybe the only other thing is grant conditions that may lock you into a certain model for a certain period of time, but usually it's only a few years after construction.
David Sullivan from Clean Heat Edinburgh Forum. Over 50% of our members are citizens, civil society. And so we addressed this problem that Sarah Jane spoke about, the risk of take-up or absence of take-up. This is to do with consumer confidence that this is the right thing to do. So my question is, what mechanisms are there going to be, because they're not evident at the moment, in raising awareness about the move from gas? We all agree this in this room. We get it. We've studied the IPCC reports. But how are we going to share that with the wider public? And the biggest blockage, stepping stone, or elephant in the room, it seems to me to be the electricity to gas price ratio. And how are we going to address that? Because unless we do that, so there's two questions there really. It's the potential pushback from customers, because they don't want to have anything to do with this thing which is being imposed on them. And how do we address the electricity price?
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll just come back on the first point. Obviously, I think James was here earlier, talked about some of the proposals from the Scottish Government around requiring connections to heat networks, which I think is a really important shift, which will help heat networks, but also help people understand that message, that this is coming and that there's going to be change. I think we all have to acknowledge that it's a highly politically sensitive point, and the reason for that is, of course, the cost. And as we discussed earlier, someone's going to have to pay for it, and I think it's a really difficult message to send. But I suppose that relates to the point about electricity, and I might pass it down to the panel to see if people have got any thoughts on structures or ways of harnessing this value.
Kind of answer your question in that our core business, Scottish Water, is I believe it's the single biggest user of electricity in Scotland. I think our bill's about 90 to 100 million pounds a year in terms of that, because we're pumping, cleaning wastewater all over the country. So on that, a big part of Horizon's team that I work alongside is doing behind the meter renewables, got off lot of land, putting up solar, micro hydro, etc., etc. So that's for reducing the water industry. But I suppose that comes back to the point of we're a heavy electricity user and probably always will be. We see that pain on a day-to-day basis. So again, in terms of the heat networks, I mentioned it earlier, private wire behind the meter makes it cheaper, or showing people with heat pumps that getting over the fallacy that they don't work in winter, be they air, ground, river, sea, sewage, etc. And I think public and perception in terms of Joe Public and businesses and state is still needed. So education.
I think we've got
I'm good.
we've got time for one more question.
Thank you, thanks to the panel. A really interesting discussion, Craig Elliott through from Rambo. We kind of touched on the challenges around retrofit, and what we quite often see is that the public sector and local authorities can define and de-risk to some extent an investable project on a kind of more limited scale. But we also know that the public sector have this role in terms of supporting the overall transition of the energy system at a much larger scale. So my question is about kind of in the context of heat network zoning, incumbency rights that these kind of limited scale initial projects give developers. How do we make sure that the kind of long-term strategic opportunity of development within a city or an area is captured as part of the evaluation of the opportunity and the role that developers would have in delivering that?
That's true. So, as you know, Craig, as part of the ENET, the sport unit, we have provided funding to local authorities to look strategically across an area to work out what the potential of a town or an area is, but also how we can optimise the best use of low carbon heat. And that, I think Anthony would agree that the importance of using that heat efficiently is much more significant than I think we probably thought initially when we started the work. In the past, heat networks were, primarily gas, CHP, and therefore you can put those kind of anywhere, whereas we don't have that luxury for low carbon heat. And there's a concern about closing off opportunities if heat is taken to the wrong place or not pushed in the right way. And at the moment, there aren't any kind of planning rules that control how heat networks come forward, but local authorities have potential at the moment to influence that in how they present the opportunities to market, what role they take, how they set out their expectations as to delivery. Whether those tools are strong enough at the moment, I don't know. Obviously in England and Wales through zoning, they have zoning requirements that set out how things would like to be done in each area, and I think we need to get to the same sort of place, whether we do it contractually or through regulated through consenting. I think it is going to be important. The other thing that we wrestle with, I suppose, though, in practical terms, is making sure that the perfect is not the enemy of the good, and we can have a big plan about how we'd like it to go, but we have to start somewhere. And so it's a really difficult balance, and at the moment it's being decided locally and delivered hopefully through procurement, but I think it's possible that that might need to change, and we may need heat planning in a way that we haven't had before. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got my pitch in here because the big district heat networks are killing me. They're so large scale. The LE strategies have got lots of circles on lots of areas, and there are whole big swathes of the country that are not in one of those circles. And we're doing absolutely nothing because we're too terrified to make a start. Right? There are projects all over Scotland, all over the UK right now that we could be starting, and there'd be 100 houses here, 200 properties there, flats at 180 flats, tower blocks. They'll never be on this. They'll never be on the district heat network. They're nowhere near one of these zones, and we just ignore them. We just ignore them because we focused entirely on district heat networks. And I'm not belittling or putting down district heat networks. I'm not in a room full of district heat network people and we get lynched for a week. Like, I'm not that daft, and we're going to pick a fight. Today's not it. But while we're talking about getting these big district heat networks up and running, and while we're identifying where they are, start somewhere. Start looking at what other projects we can do right now. Because if you don't, in 10 and 15 years' time, they're still going to be there. They're still going to be there. And we're all going to be having exactly the same conversation. You said it. Start somewhere and build out. Because if we don't, we're going to leave too many people behind. In these rural areas, Paul was at the South of Scotland, the head of Walk campus. We were there. We were talking about, we had a couple of heat network representatives there, and one of them actually stood up in the room and said, yeah, we won't touch this. There aren't enough off-takers. There aren't enough anchor loads. The consistency of heat demand is not there. And I think those 2 or 3 people in the room just kind of went, all right, what do we do now? Because they were all hoping for this white charger coming over the hill. And it's not going to be there. So the rural areas, for example, there's 300,000-400,000 properties in Scotland off gas, in the Highlands and in the south of Scotland. I mean, it's a massive number of people that we've got to be careful we don't ignore them.
Just, I feel the need to defend just local authorities just a little bit for a second. Because I think one of the challenges, they do have these duties, but actually they don't have the powers or the resources that they need to achieve some of the, so that you're talking about the wider strategic decarbonisation of an area. Well, how are they, what's the steps they're going to take in order to do that, and who's going to help them do that? So there's probably a lobby to government to say, well, if you like local authorities to deliver this, then you have to fund them to do it, and you have to give them the powers that they need to do it. So that's my little defence for local authorities. I don't disagree with what Mark's saying.
I agree.
Just quickly, we at Scottish Water Horizon to do a bit of both. We have the view that we should get stuff done, get stuff in the ground. So we work with private partners and public partners to do, say, campus-sized developments. Simultaneously, and I know there's a few of the guys in the room from various local authorities, LEs, we'll work with them and help them with their LEs mapping. Now, we are a heat source, we're not the only one, or a silver bullet, so we'll work with all the local authorities to map where our networks are, treatment works, potential heat, etc., etc. And we will regularly meet with them to kind of keep them up to date with what's there. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have an unlimited money pot and we could just build Copenhagen overnight, public money. But, you know, we try to straddle the two and do a bit more pragmatic approach.
I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much, everyone. There's lots, we've had some really good discussion. There's probably lots to continue discussing over lunch. Thank you very much to the panel for your time.